welcome back to this week's podcast, and very, very excited about being back on here and just sharing. We kind of took a break from our Why I Am Not series. We hit a couple of different things. We've been traveling, preaching, and we went to a youth rally and a bunch of different things. So I did kind of quick thoughts that hopefully were a help to you. I know I got some really good feedback from the different thoughts, and hopefully it was a help to you as well. And that's what we seek to do, is to not only equip you, and but we also want to provoke some good thoughts, provoke you to action, but also just let you know kind of how God feels about you and how we should feel about God. Excuse me. And so we're diving back into this series, Why I Am Not, and today I want to hit on why I am not an atheist. Now, the reason why I kind of titled it Why I Am Not is because I don't want to speak for everybody. I don't want to speak for just different things and making all these claims. I want to speak for why I personally am not any of these things that we've mentioned so far. And I want to discuss today why I'm not an atheist. And when you look up statistics of atheism around the world, you see hundreds of millions of atheism. Now, I believe personally, me and Brother James are talking about this, that there's not really any atheist, because everybody believes in something. Everybody believes, whether that God's themselves, because they've set the standard of what is right and wrong, of what they believe, different things like that. Or people are believing there is a God. They're maybe more so agnostic and believe that God maybe created the world and stepped away. There's also other people who have maybe accepted Christ, but later on in life have faced some struggles, have faced some battles, and wondered in their head, would God do the things that he does? Or this is a bigger one, why would God allow things to happen? God has the power to stop things. Why did he let my mom die? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And so that maybe has allowed your view to be skewed in a certain way. And I would highly encourage you on our YouTube page, Victory Baptist Church, Copperas Cove, Texas. If you want to look at the playlist, we have a playlist of why do bad things happen to good people. Also, my pastor, Brother Eric, or our pastor, is planning on preaching a sermon of why do bad things happen to good people, I believe this Sunday. We also have a podcast on it, so you can look through and find these different sources that hopefully will be a help to you. And there are hundreds of millions of atheists around the world, and that might be discouraging to maybe some Christians are on here like, man, we just want people to see God, and we just want people to be reached by God. That's the reason why we go witnessing. That's the reason why we tell people. It's like, why in the world would we waste our time doing this video, going around telling people, if we genuinely didn't want to help and to reach people with the gospel and reach people with Christ? And if you're an atheist on here today, we genuinely want to see you reached by Christ because we care about you. And so that's a big thing. But that might be discouraging all the atheists because we want people to be reached by God. But a variation, this was a study shared the other day by Lee Strobel. There's a variation of, is there a God asked, or just questions about God asked and searched 200 times a second. So just as many people that are out there that might say, I don't believe in a God, or maybe they've stepped away from the faith, there's so many other people that are searching, and they're caring, and they want to know, is there a God? Can I find hope? All these different things. Because really, in reality, there is no hope without Christ. There's no hope without God. I mean, literally, we are all men most miserable if there was no resurrection. And I would highly encourage you, search out the resurrection. We're talking about God today, not talking necessarily about the resurrection, but I highly encourage you. Lee Strobel was someone who was an atheist, and he didn't really care about the things of God. And he went to study it to disprove the resurrection, to disprove Jesus Christ, and he ended up getting saved because there was so much overwhelming evidence. And I highly encourage you, do that study on your own. Search that out yourself, because if you search it out and ask God, if you are there, show me things, he'll show you. If you'll follow that light, and he'll end up showing you all that truth. But there's really no reason at all for life if there's no God. There is no Christ, but he is risen, he is alive, and there is a reason. I mean, there's no reason for the careers, no reason for any of that if we just go to dust. But there is a reason, because Jesus Christ is alive, and he's given many reasons for that. Number one, he gives a lot of things pointing us to him. You see that, number one, in creation. You see Psalms 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day to day uttereth speech, and not in the night showeth knowledge. God literally set up creation. This is what he made, and said, because of this, you can know that there's a creator. I'm going to kind of get into the verse later, but Hebrews 3:4 said, every house is builded by some man, yet he that createth all things is God. So we see, literally logically speaking, you don't look at a phone. Me and Brother James are talking about this. You don't look at a phone. You don't look at a house. You don't walk into a house or a building or a facility or anything that was created, and you never say that just came into be by itself. There had to be a cause. There had to be a creator. There had to be an intelligent design behind it. So when you look at creation, you can say, okay, there is a God. He's the one creating it. Not only you see it in creation, Psalm 19, you see it in your conscience and the morality. There's a law written on our hearts. As you're sitting here today, you know the difference between right and wrong. You know that as you do something, you're like, man, I don't have a feeling I should do this. God has written on your conscience, a law and rules in your heart that say the difference between right and wrong. And God has set that up in place. He set up other Christians to be able to reach back to God, to point them back to God. As I'm doing today, I'm sharing this video, I'm sharing this podcast, hopefully as an encouragement to go to God, to look to God. So he has the conscience, he has the creation, he has other Christians, he has these things that point you back to God. But when we're discussing the topic of evolution, where it all started more commonly. Now, there's other people that were involved, but more commonly, it started with Charles Darwin. Even though other people were involved, Charles Darwin came up with these belief systems, and they was encouraged by friends to publish these works. Charles Darwin was actually born into a really wealthy family, and so he had a lot of time on his hands. With that time, he ended up going to Edinburgh College for 2 years before dropping out, which is all the scientific training that he had. And the reason why he dropped out is because he spent most of the time at bars with friends, and that's why he barely passed the classes, so he ended up dropping out. So one of Charles Darwin's closest friends, Russell Wallace actually gave a lot of the ideas to Charles Darwin, kind of encouraged him to publish some things, and then just was, hey, we need to go forward with this. Well, he eventually separated from Darwin because he saw how advanced and how complex the human brain was, and he said that there's no way the evolutionary processes could have produced this. And so he saw God's creation. He saw what God has done and said, there's no way that these kind of amazing things came to be. And he eventually, the person who had given the ideas to Darwin, actually separated from Darwin. And Darwin himself commented frequently in his letters on how he recognized that there was no evidence for his theory and that it could destroy the morality of the human race and humanity. You see some of these things in Charles Darwin, Life and Letters, 1887, Volume 2, page 229. Charles Darwin, kind of some of the way that some of these things started, Charles Darwin was on the Galapagos Island, I don't know how you say this, and he saw these finches which had blown into South America, and they adapted to their environment, producing several subspecies. He was certain that this showed cross-species evolution, which means to change into a new species from another kind, but the finches were still finches. And this theory about finches was the primary evidence of evolution he brought back with him to England. Darwin, who was never a scientist, he knew nothing about the practicalities of genetics, and obviously we know he dropped out of college after a short amount of time and was barely even making it to the classes because of all the partying and the things he was doing. He knew nothing about the practicalities of genetics or any of these things. He ended up marrying his first cousin, and this is what resulted from that. It resulted in all of 7 of his children having physical or mental disorders. One girl died after birth, another died at 10 years old, and one had a breakdown at 15 years old. One of the other sons was born mentally retarded, which when I say that, I don't mean that with any disrespect at all. I'm just sharing what was written, and died 19 months after birth. Then after this, 3 of his sons become partially disabled. So you saw a person who was barely in college. He doesn't really have any background when it comes to scientific things. He was barely in college, was dropping out of college, then marries and doesn't know even the science behind the genetics, and marries his first coven, which ends up in all of his children suffering from the things that they suffered. Karl Marx is closely linked with Darwinism, and that which Darwinism did to biology, Marx did to society. Marx was thrilled. He read the book by Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species, and even wrote to Darwin to be a part of his own major work. But Darwin said, "Thank you, but I think it would be best not to do so." So Darwin, in his own mind, is realizing some of these things are not the way they should be. It's leading down a path that is not right. And even when he mentioned in his letters that this could lead to the destruction of the human race and human morality. And so evolutionists are leaving their position after deep study of the lack of evidence. There's an ardent evolutionist, or there was, named Austin Clarke. He worked at the Smithsonian and wrote about 600 articles. And out of the 42 years of working for the Smithsonian and at the Smithsonian, he had not found any evidence for cross-species evolution, and ended up writing a new book called The New Evolution, Zoogenesis, disproving every possibility that animals and plants could have evolved from one thing into a new thing. And not one evolutionist, they were all examining this book, looking at the facts. He literally, fact after fact after fact, he was sharing. And not one evolutionist could answer these facts nor disprove the facts that he gave. Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous atheists living right now, said that he recently started calling him a cultural Christian because he is shocked and horrified by the inevitable consequences of his atheist movement he had established. So there's just a big problem is when we live as though there is no God, we live with no morals, so then we treat people however we want to be treated, and we live in this. When you're teaching people that people came from a monkey, they're going to start acting like it. And when they start acting like, you have school shootings, all these different things, it's kind of crazy. When you examine some of these different things from different shooters back in history, they had a history of Darwinism. When you study out Adolf Hitler, a lot of the things that he was influenced by was Darwinism. And he thought one species was over another. And that's why you saw him killing all these different things. And this is something that impacts people, impacts schools, impacts people in a huge way. These belief systems, and the way that you believe is the way that you are going to act. Your behavior is always connected and impacted by what you believe. And that's why some of these things are so important by the way we believe, because we have no value of life in ourselves or in others when we start believing these different things. And I don't just believe evolution is false just because I want to hope that there's a God, because I just don't want to realize that there's dust. No, there's infallible proofs. God has shown himself in creation and conscience and other Christians and everything that he's laid. Even the Bible has no errors in it. You can examine it. There's archaeological proofs and all these different things. God has left all this evidence for us, and it's just crazy for us to ignore everything that he's laid in front of us and just think that all these things came to be. So what I wanted to do today is kind of share with you briefly some problems that I see with evolution. I'm probably going to do a part 2 of this just because there's so much evidence to go through, so many things to go through, but just wanted to share with you some problems with evolution. Number 1, I see the solar collapse problem. The sun is shrinking every single year and is burning away, and they say it is shrinking about 8.3 miles each year, which means 2 things. That 50,000 years ago, the sun would have been so big, because they say that the Earth has been around for millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years. But if that were the case and the sun were around, it would have been so big that it would have boiled the oceans and it would have been destroyed, and life would have ceased to exist if this was the case. And the crazy thing about this as well is the sun is literally in the perfect place. If it was a little closer or if it was a little too far away, life would cease to exist, and it would be terrible the way we were living. God, the fine-tuning argument, God has set things in place so well that everything is the way that we would need it to be to survive. Evolution just didn't bring it to be. We didn't just come to form. God, there was an intelligent designer behind all this. Also, I want you to see another problem with evolution, that we've been around for millions of years and all these different things. Why is there only the population problem? I want you to notice. Why is there only 7 to 8 billion people on the earth? Since 1900, the Earth's population rose from 3 billion people to 7 billion people. If people have been on the Earth for millions of years, why isn't the population more than it is? So we see that the solar collapse problem, we see the population problem. I want you to notice also the historical problem. Why are the oldest historical records only 6,000 years old if mankind has been around for 100,000 plus years? Why is that the case? Why is there only historical records for that? The earliest records are that of the Egyptians and the Hebrews. And yet, if we were around so much farther than that, the population would be bigger, but also we would have more historical records for people and things that have been around. I want you to notice also the astronomical record problem. Solar eclipses have been used for a great time, accurate dating factors, which is kind of crazy. We just literally had a solar eclipse happen a couple days ago. And the next one, I think they said, is going to happen in 2044. So it's a rare occurrence. And this is a great thing to use for accurate dating because of the infrequency that it shows up, that it comes in the solar eclipses. The dates for these go back thousands of years, all these solar eclipses, and the mention of these in the manuscripts and ancient tablets are incredible finds. A solar eclipse is strong evidence for the dating of an event when ancient records can corroborate it. But you know what the crazy thing is? As rare as it happens, which means that we should have more record of it, there are no records of one solar eclipse happening prior to 2250 BC, which is very important evidence as well for a young Earth, that there's no evidence beyond that problem. I want you to notice also the civilization problem. It is highly significant that no truly verified archaeological datings predate the period of 3000 BC. When larger dates are mentioned, it is used from radiocarbon dating, from other methods, but other than human writing. I want you to notice also the floor sediment problem. If the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, then why does the ocean's floor sediment account for only a few thousand years? The oldest living coral reef is less than 4,200 years old, which makes perfect sense when one considers that the Genesis flood occurred around 4,400 years ago and would have killed all such life forms. The oldest tree problem. The oldest living trees in the world are the bristlecone pines of the desert mountains in California and Nevada. Why can't anyone find an older tree? If we've been around for hundreds of thousands of years, even at the minimum, why can't we find trees that are older than 5,000 years old? Because the Genesis flood wiped out all the trees less than 5,000 years old. We also have the comet problem. Scientists generally agree that comets are as old as our solar system. The dissolution process of short-term comets demand that they would totally be dissipated in 10,000 years. So how could they be billions of years old? I want you to notice the fine-tuning problem. I want to list some things for you really quickly that if they were not right the way they should be, then things would be a complete mess. But we know that there's an intelligent designer behind it that set it up. Number one, if the centrifugal force of planetary movements did not precisely balance the gravitational forces, nothing could be held in orbit around the sun. Number two, if the universe had expanded at a rate 1/millionth more slowly than it did, expansion would have stopped and the universe would have collapsed on itself before any stars had formed. If it expanded faster, then no galaxies itself would have formed. Number three, any of the laws of physics can be described as a function of the velocity of light, now defined as 299,792,458 meters per second. Even a slight variation in the speed of light would alter the constants and preclude the possibility of life on Earth. Number four, if water vapor's levels in the atmosphere were greater than they are now, a runaway greenhouse effect would cause temperatures to rise too high for human life. If there were less, an insufficient greenhouse effect would make the Earth too cold to support human life. If Jupiter were not in current orbit, the Earth would be bombarded with space material. Jupiter's gravitational field acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner, attracting asteroids and comets that might otherwise strike Earth. If the thickness of the Earth's crust were greater, too much oxygen would be transferred to the crust to support life, If it were thinner, volcanic and tectonic activity would make life impossible. If the rotation of Earth took longer than 24 hours, temperature differences would be too great between night and day. If the rotation period were shorter, the atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. The 23-degree axial tilt of the Earth is just right. If the tilt were altered slightly, surface temperatures would be too extreme on Earth. If the atmospheric discharge lightning rate were greater, then there would be too much fire destruction. If it were less, there would be too little nitrogen fixing in the soil. Lastly, but on the list, but definitely not least, if there were more seismic activity, much more life would be lost. If there were less, nutrients on the ocean floor and in the river runoff would not be cycled back to the continents through tectonic uplift. Yes, even earthquakes are necessary to sustain life as we know it. So this is just crazy. All this stuff that we're going through is God has so intelligently set up life that we live it. Everything is exactly the way it needed to be. There's so many different factors that there has to be an intelligent design. That God had to set things exactly. And literally what the Bible says, without me you can do nothing. But he also says that all things consist because of God. Literally. Everything is perfect the way it needs to be because there's a God in heaven that's controlling everything. Number one, universe that had a beginning had a cause. Number two, the universe had a beginning. You know, Albert Einstein, I'm even talking about general relativity, even said that the Earth had a beginning. Now, we have different arguments of how Earth had a beginning, but if the universe had a beginning, it had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause, and God was that cause. Everything that came into being, and universe literally means a single spoken sentence, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. God said, all it takes is to look at what I've created and to know, and I've already quoted Hebrews through, that every house was built by some man, and he that built all things is God. And honestly, it just takes logic to realize and to think that there has to be a creator, and nothing else that's came into being has not had a cause. Then why in the world would we believe that this creation, the things that we have, do not have a cause as well? Let's see here. Something that I didn't point out before is being an atheist, you have your own belief system. You have faith that what you believe in is accurate. We just merely put our faith in God. Another question that comes up as well, and this is kind of where I'm going to end it, is who created God then? You know, okay, if everything had a cause, then who created God? Well, if the law of causality is true, then who made God? The law of causality, which means that everything has a cause that came into being, the law of causality does not say everything needs a cause. It says that everything that comes to be needs a cause. God did not come to be. No one made God. God's an eternal being. He's unmade. He did not have a beginning. Therefore, he needs no cause. He was the first cause for everything to come into being. And so I wanted to kind of hit on that as our first kind of lesson today as far as why I'm not an atheist. Just showing you, I know that was a lot of information. I want to kind of maybe go into part two of maybe less information, but I just wanted to share with you that there's so much to think about. And there's so much to think about because there has to be an intelligent designer, and God had to have had a part in this. And if he didn't, there's no way everything would be the way that it is set up in the place that it's supposed to be set up in. And I would highly encourage you, if you are an atheist, please study into these things. But if you're a Christian, get excited that we do have a God that set up everything, and it's very exciting to see everything he's going to do with us. So thank you so much for tuning into the part one. I'm going to go into the part two probably next week or later, and hopefully all this stuff is kind of a help to you, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.